Uh, Firstly, the kind of challenge that Narasimha Rao government faced as we entered the post-Cold War era, it's not so acute today. There is a fair amount of clarity as to the world order and the international system. Paradoxically, India is actually very comfortably placed. If only the prerequisite for it is that if only we can creatively adapt a concept which we invented all by ourselves, that is non-alignment. What has happened is, in this period since the 90s, a lot of influence by the American think tanks and so on, they have succeeded virtually in debunking non-alignment, discrediting it, and almost brandishing it as a kind of irrelevant, archaic, moth-eaten concept. But the basic lacuna lies somewhere else, which is that we have not tried to creatively work on that concept and find its application to the contemporary realities, the correlation of forces today in the contemporary world situation. That is, the fault is ours. So when I say that the situation is favorable, India can actually have a larger than life influence in the international situation today, which is what Panditji managed to achieve. We can have it, and then we can tap it in many ways. And today's circumstances, we can tap it in most unexpected ways. With all the other factors taken into account, China's rise, Russia's re-emergence as a global player on the world stage, a rather robust relationship with the United States, all this available, and but we have not done that. So I feel that first remark I would like to make is that a government which has come after the 2014 poll with a comfortable majority and an assured political stability for the country, it was in a position to take initiative to launch India into a brave new world in the sphere of foreign policy. Unfortunately, this hasn't happened. Second, we all of us may be coming across this remark that fundamentally, basically, the foreign policy of this present government, the NDA government, hasn't changed. It is more or less the foreign policy of the UPA government. Yes and no. Of course, it's a fact that the compass of foreign policy, it cannot be tinkered with just like that, and that too for a big country like India. And an arc, or in any other direction, a course correction has to be over a big arc. That is quite evident. But then what can happen is, in the actual practice of diplomacy, you can have a lot of fine-tuning. And sometimes it's one of those curious situations where the fine-tuning, they don't get noticed very often. But they actually come into the center space and center stage. And then the foreign policy, you see aberrations coming into the foreign policy. This has happened. I will substantiate this by going into a few cases. A third aspect is that we have a moral right to hold Prime Minister Modi to the yardstick that he presented. No one prompted him during the 2014 campaign. Now, he placed enormous importance on what the strategic thinkers call geo-economics. Now, that's a yardstick Modi set for himself, and he is answerable. Again, we need to examine what has been the shortfall there and whether there has been a performance at all there on that front. Now, in all these things, when you come to what you find is that the centrality that we have attached to the partnership, as we call it, with the United States, that continues. But that is taking a very different turn today. A deepening of the military to military cooperation, and more importantly, a kind of lurch toward bandwagoning with the United States on its rebalance strategy in Asia. Now, this is a completely unnecessary deviation for India, because the first point which I mentioned about non-alignment and this is a contradictory tendencies. We have no reason at all to have had a joint vision statement on the Asia-Pacific and the Indian Ocean issued during the visit of President Obama last year. In fact, we are now trying to bury it decently. And this visit of the Prime Minister to the United States, I can bet that both sides will be far too embarrassed to recall that there was a joint statement like this. So much has changed in a matter of just about 15 months in the Asia-Pacific region. As far as this visit itself is concerned, the impression one gets is that we have imposed ourselves on the Obama administration. We proposed a state visit, and we bragged about a state visit. They were not keen on it. Now all we are getting is actually a working visit, not even an official visit. A working visit takes place when there is an emergent situation. Vladimir Putin decides on Russian intervention in Syria, and Benjamin Netanyahu, who is an affected party, would like to go to Moscow immediately. That's a working visit, to find out what is going on in Putin's mind and what is going to be its impact on Israel's core interests. That is the kind of circumstances, the emergent situations that call for working visits. I don't see anything of that kind taking place either in the regional international situation or in the India-US relationship. So he's going on a working visit. Now here I am coming to a paradigm of a very curious thing. This has never happened before in Indian diplomacy. The foreign policy and diplomacy being made instruments for grandstanding, for projection into, and if you go into the social network sites, you find absurd estimations being made about Modi's jaunts abroad. Now, so it's all, he doesn't take any press party, and all that is happening is the media is spoon-fed, and a very pliant media laps it up very loyally, writes about it, and he's projecting to the uninformed sections of opinion in the country. Those who know about international politics and those who know about how diplomacy works, they know that all this is absolute show and no substance. But he is using this to build up for himself a stature. And a stature which is, actually speaking, covering up bankruptcy of ideas, of creative thinking. Because it's a fallacy to think that, international diplomacy and foreign policy you can understand unless you have an erudite mind which has a sense of history. I leave it at that. So, there is a serious problem here. Now, if you come to the case studies, look at what was attempted in the case of Pakistan. It's a very, very, very difficult relationship. So much of blood has flowed. Thousands of lives have been lost. Wars have been fought. It's a very complicated relationship. And look at the flippancy with which he took an initiative to Nawaz Sharif. And Pakistan was naturally stunned at that time when they got this invitation. And I think our president was also stunned and asked, what is it going on? Because he was also present on the occasion when the SAARC leaders were invited. Of course, it was a very nice thing, appearance-wise. But then Pakistanis thought, and some back channels had worked also even before the election. Some very important people from Pakistan had visited Gujarat. So they concluded that this is a potential breakthrough. And then where it ended. We had absolutely no blueprint. We had no intentions of the sort that Pakistani side thought we had. And then this initiative became a liability for us, and we needed to find a good reason why we should wriggle out of this initiative. Now this is again repeated in the case of China. I cannot understand actually why we staged the theatrics on that balmy afternoon on the banks of Sabarmati. A Chinese leader has never been welcomed probably by a foreign power in this way, what we saw. Of course, we could have rationalized it. It made sense to connect with a man so that again, another very, very difficult relationship can be approached from a different angle, if creative thinking had gone into it. But then you see, as all of us know, the visit had two parts. One is what we saw on the television in Sabarmati, and then the next day in Delhi, an entirely different tune being played out. And then at the end of it, the visit ends on a sour note. I hope that Pranab Mukherjee's visit will finally, with this visit, we may probably recover from the setback that this relationship suffered. Chinese Consul General in Mumbai was on record that Xi Jinping was coming with an offer of investment to the tune of $100 billion in India. $100 billion. It's quite logical, because if they find, and Chinese are not the kind of people who put money on the table where there is uncertainty about returns. And if they are prepared to put 46 billion on the table for Pakistan, it's quite, and then Chinese diplomats never speak out of turn, and that too in terms of what their leader is going to say. So this was the intention. And then finally the man said about a figure of $20 billion. So, after the Delhi thing, till today, we really don't know what happened. Now, I find it simply incredulous, the fact that their own military, of which the Military Commission's chairman is Xi Jinping, undercut Xi Jinping's visit to India by staging an incident like this in Ladakh. I find it very difficult to believe, because they are not such irrational people. And also they take, when their leader goes abroad, they take such visits very seriously. So what happened, we really don't know. So in other words, you find a kind of unseen hand at work, both in the case of Pakistan and in the case of China. When you come to Nepal, you are finding a variant of it in a different way. Like when you come to Nepal, you find actually a variant of the same phenomenon, that it becomes actually a little more explicit when it comes to Nepal. The problem basically with Nepal, as I understand it, is this business of persuading them to have a constitution making their country a Hindu Rashtra. Now this is very important for the doctrine of Akhanda Bharat. And this is also the only Hindu kingdom on the planet. And if that kingdom is a secular state and not a Hindu Rashtra, then what is Akhanda Bharat about? So this is the abode of Lord Shiva and all that taken into account. So now we tried, and here we come to the problem in relations with China, Pakistan and Nepal. There is a backseat driver, and that backseat driver is no one else than the Sangh Parivar. Now they have been sending missions to these countries, including to Pakistan, and preparing their own foreign policy vision. They have an agenda with regard to Sri Lanka. They mounted missions. In fact, they even sold the idea to the Chinese Communist Party. RSS missions. One of the visits that I undertook to Beijing on a lecture tour, I stayed in the same hotel where the RSS people were staying, and that's how I came to know that RSS people were also there in Beijing at that time, at the invitation. So when I found out that they said that at the invitation of the Chinese Communist Party. So they were, of course the Chinese were fooled, but they undertook similar missions to Sri Lanka, to Nepal, to even to Pakistan. So they are the driving, they are the drivers, and Mr. Modi is doing the grandstanding. And with the neighboring countries, the relationship has come to this pass basically because of this sort of a dichotomy existing. The intellectual resources available in the foreign policy establishment, their historical memory about relations with these countries, that is all being bypassed. How it is operating in Delhi today, it's a little better lately, but it was very bad that the South Bloc and the foreign policy establishment had a very peripheral role in the conduct of foreign policy. Then on top of it, that there are very serious issues. I don't know, in a limited time I can say this, but a very senior Pakistani diplomat, I can't mention his name, with whom I had lunch here, he asked me point blank, he said, Badran, have you seen this video of your national security advisor bragging about Dawood Ibrahim? So I said, no, I haven't seen it. But he said that this is being played all over Pakistan. And the kind of excessive statements that people in responsible position made, that we will do another Baluchistan on you, this sort of remarks. So in Pakistan now, there is no possibility, in fact, of a breakthrough. And then the other part of it, that senior ministers for the first time openly speak about terrorism as an instrument of state policy against Pakistan. Then Defense Minister himself has said that justifying the use of terrorist groups as an instrument of state policy. And a lot that is happening is obviously we do not know. And we have always this problem about, blaming Pakistan and not really knowing what has been the code of conduct on our part, So there is always a problem there. So all this taken into account, these relationships are actually now quite jammed. Now I come to Modi's own geo-economics. In terms of geo-economics, the irony is the whole development agenda that Modi promised us during the 2014 poll, this development agenda critically depends on a good relationship with China. Because it's only China which has that kind of money that is necessary for infrastructure development and so on. It's only China which has also got the relevant expertise and experience, because they have just gone through this in the last 30 years or so. It's not going to come from the Western world. And unless we straighten out this relationship, you look at it already, 2 years have gone. Now we have 1.5 million youngsters coming out every single month in India. And last year, whole of last year, Modi managed to create 1.45 lakhs jobs. It's pathetic. Economy is growing. I don't know what kind of thing is happening here. Economy is supposedly growing at a rapid rate, highest growth rate in the world, but it doesn't create any jobs. You see, this is the kind of situation. There is a complete disconnect I find here. The foreign policy is working in a very different way, like in terms of propagating yoga, Madison Square Garden, and all these things going on. And a visit to Mongolia we offered a credit line of $1 billion. Do you remember? Modi offered a credit line of $1 billion. How do we even undertake a project in Mongolia? We don't have an access to Mongolia. So, this sort of thing, again, the thing is wearing a hat and, boots and, riding a horse, holding a bow and arrow, and, it's all projected here. So, see, it's all very farcical, what is happening. And foreign policy is just being made, a theater for him to project himself. Whatever we may say, the fact that, around 500 million people have no hope on earth and, are wandering like lost souls, what is the foreign policy able to do for them? This is the yardstick that we have to apply, and this is the yardstick that Modi promised that he is going to apply. So in my assessment, as we come to that, he has just scraped through to show something in another couple of days when he completes 2 years in office. That is for the first time a kind of substantive visit that he undertook to Iran. This is the only thing that he can show. And here also we have signed an agreement. Nothing has happened. We have signed an agreement. What is going to be the performance? What is going to be the follow? And are there other interest groups involved in it? We really do not know still. But this is the only thing. Other than this, if you look at it, all these 26, 28 visits that have taken place, actually there is absolutely no beef in it. This is the situation today.